Hey folks, it's Viejo here, and we are beginning the third week of September in 2024. Summer's coming to a screeching halt here very shortly. Had a nice day here on the Central Coast of California. It's real foggy this morning here. This is a follow-up video to the metrics video I did with the Sierra V Crown factory seconds that I'd got from Midway. We did that review earlier in the week, and there's a link in the description box down there. You can go take a look at that if you're interested. But I went ahead and loaded some up and took them to the range to shoot to see how they would do. I'm going to show you what happened there. It was actually all pretty good. The Sierra reloading manual has some data in there for you. It has specific data for the 125 grain SIG V Crown. They didn't have data for the V Crown and the 115, but they have data for another Sierra 115 grain bullet, and I kind of worked from that. You won't get to see any of the loading part here if you're on YouTube, but if you're watching on Rumble, then that video is gonna will contain the loading sequence. And I didn't put much in there for loading. It was pretty basic, nothing spectacular there. I got them loaded. I loaded a couple of steps. The Sierra book for both the 115 grain and the 125 grain list 3.6 grains of tight group, which is the powder that I use, as the max. Okay, and so I started down lower than that with a lower load just to test to be sure that we were going to be safe. Sierra said that 115 grain bullet, again, not the V Crown, but their 115 grain jacketed hollow point, with 3.6 grains of tight group should go out at about 1,100 feet per second. And they said that for the 125 grain, again, their max with tight group was also 3.6 grains, and they said 1,050 feet per second. I tried to find the values that SIG used with their defense ammo, which is what they put those V Crown bullets into, as far as the specs for muzzle velocity. And they claimed for the 115 grain 1,050 feet per second, and for the 125 they showed the only one I could find was 124, and they showed 1,189 feet per second for their 124 grain defense load. So that's kind of what I was looking for, to see how close we would get to those values compared to what Sierra said we would get with tight group. So if you're on YouTube, we're going to go kind of right to looking at the rounds where, when I finish reloading them, and then we'll go to the range. And if you're watching on Rumble, you're going to see a little bit of the footage for the reloading sequence. Here's my components. That's mixed range brass, 6 times fired. I got a couple dummy rounds made up. I've already got these sized and primed to save you guys some time on the video. We're going to use Remington number 1.5 primers and tight group powder. The Sierra loading manual, that is, doesn't list the V Crown 115 grain at all. They have another 150 grain bullet, their own. It's very similar, and we're going to use data from that. They do list the 125 grain V Crown though, and so we're also going to use the data for that. Turns out that both of those max out at 3.6 grains, so we're going to do a step below that and a step at 3.6 on each one of these. SIG defense ammo claims 1,100 feet per second with their 115 grain V Crown. I couldn't find anything with a 125 V Crown, but they do have a defense load with their 124 V Crown, and they maxed that one out at 1,189 feet per second. Neither one of the max charges that Sierra lists for either of these bullets get up quite that high. I think the max for, well, actually, I guess it does for this one. The max, I think that Sierra shows for the 115 is about 1,100 feet per second with 3.6 of tight group. And over here, about 1050 with 3.6 grain. So we're going to load 15 at each step. We'll run 5 across the chronograph, and then a mag full of 10, and see how we do. Okay, there we go. Loaded up, ready to go to the range. Incidentally, those loading blocks are those really nice ones that were made for me by the 6-shooter Texan. They're absolutely wonderful. All right, let's go see what happens when we shoot them. Okay, so they loaded up real fine. Again, 1.05 for the 115 grains and 1.03 for the 125 grains. And then went ahead and went to the range, and in the we shot two steps on each one, and I'll show you the targets. They shot okay, actually. The one that shot the best for me was the lower charge of the 115 grain, but it was a little bit anemic, I thought. And in fact, I think both of the two bullet weights could go up a little bit above what Sierra said for max. So we're still a little bit lower than what SIG claims for their loads. Shot them out of the Springfield 1911 9mm, which usually does a reasonable job for me. But let's go ahead and take a look at the range footage now, and I will put in a subtitle there what the muzzle velocities and standard deviations were. Okay, there are nothing thrilling about the standard deviations. The lower charge of the SIG 115 was actually the best standard deviation at just a little under 7. The other ones were all 10, 12s. Okay, but let's go ahead and take a look at the range footage. Nice. Well, now you know. I figured by the time the 115 with 3.4 grains, not too bad. 15 with 3.6 grains, I threw one away, but other than that, that's respectable. This is the 125, they ran a little slow. That's 3.4 grains. And there's 125 with 3.6 grains, a pretty good group except for that flinch flyer down there. So the shooting went okay. I was kind of hoping that, some of you guys would, go ahead and pick up some of those bullets, because I think it was a good deal, and it turns out that a number of you did. And I believe that as of this video that there's still some there at Midway. But I also wanted to give you some starting points and make sure you knew that there was some data available for you in the Sierra loading manual, and you can see what I did. But you know, as we always say here on YouTube, don't take YouTube for gospel. Okay, don't believe me. Go and work up your own loads. Okay, those worked the way you saw for my firearm. You should work your own loads up to that point and make sure everything's going to be safe. Okay, I had no issues with pressure signs on the brass or anything like that, but that's me with that firearm. So I hope you got something out of that. If you got questions or comments, go ahead and feel free to drop them down below. But from the Viejo bench for now, that's all she wrote.